Hey, welcome back to the Pretty Well podcast. I'm Lisa Smith. Today we're talking about lifestyle changes and why some of them stick, but many of them just don't. Have you ever set a goal and felt really clear and motivated and thought, this time is different? I'm going to do this. I'm making this change, and that's that. Then in a few weeks, a month or so, you're right back to where you started. Same patterns, same friction, same quiet thought of why can't I stick with something, and lots more frustration. Most people go to one of two places. Either one, I need more discipline, or two, I really didn't want it that badly anyway. But what if neither of those things were true? And what if it really didn't have anything to do with your effort, but something that you haven't heard before, and it's something deeper that no one's ever told you to change? And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the real reason new habits don't stick, no matter how badly we want them. And here's something I see all the time, personally, with clients, with people across the board. And that is that people try to change their habits without changing the identity that habits rest on. It's like trying to build a completely new life without changing the internal blueprint or the operating system that we're running on. So if you had a laptop, say you have a Mac and you didn't get the new iOS update, and you let that go for a really long time, years and years, it would not be able to run the new programs because it wouldn't have the capacity to run them. It's the same idea with our identity. You can download a new tracker, you can buy a new journal, and for a while it works. But eventually, something pulls you back. It's not because you're lazy or not disciplined enough, but because your brain is wired for consistency and familiarity. And it wants to pull you back so that your actions match who deep down inside you believe you actually are. So if your identity tells you, and a lot of times this isn't even conscious, this is subconscious. But if your identity tells you, I'm someone who struggles to follow through, it will very quietly steer you back in that direction, even if consciously you want something different. I've seen it in my own life, trust me, where I've tried to optimize my routine, my systems, and on paper it looked great. But honestly, something felt off. It felt like putting on a shoe that didn't fit. And underneath it all, things were shifting. Who I was becoming didn't match how I was living. And until I caught on, things just didn't stick. And here's the tricky part. Your identity doesn't show up as a problem you have to fix. It shows up as your truth. It sounds like, this is just who I am. This is who I've always been. I'm not that kind of a person, or I am this kind of person. And your brain, your subconscious, loves that kind of certainty. Even if that older identity is limiting, it's familiar. And familiar to your amygdala, your limbic brain, your subconscious, that feels like safety. So the moment you decide that you're going to pursue a goal or a dream, and you show up doing something differently, speaking up for yourself more, stretching yourself more, when that starts to happen, your brain creates friction. Not because you're doing anything wrong, although it feels really wrong, but because you're doing something new and it's not familiar, and your limbic brain is saying, this isn't safe. So it begins to quietly sabotage you. I've had that in my life when I was starting speaking, and this voice in my head said, who am I to be a public speaker? Who would want to listen to me? And it began to undermine and work against me. And the answer to that question I was asking really deep down inside of who am I to be public speaking is that's not who my identity was in the past, but it was who I was becoming. There's that gap between this is who I used to be, this is who I'm becoming. I'm not quite there, but I'm on my way there, but I still feel like the old version of me, and it's very uncomfortable because nothing quite jives, nothing lines up. If you've ever felt imposter syndrome, that's what it is. You're striving to the next level of who you're becoming for your goals and dreams, but familiar still feels like the old version of you who wouldn't do any of those things. So your brain begins to sabotage you and say things like, who are you to do this? Since when do you do that? That's not who you are. No one's going to believe you. No one's going to trust you because your brain, the whole goal of your subconscious is to keep you safe and to keep you alive. And new things feel really scary and really not safe. And your subconscious starts to think, well, I might not survive this. So I got to stop her from doing this. I got to stop this right now. But here's the reframe that changes the game. You don't need to focus on doing things perfectly. You want to focus on who are you when you're living that ideal version of your life. It's not an overnight shift, but it's a really intentional one. So the shift is in asking, who am I becoming and what are the habits she does? And what would she do first? Because your habits are an offshoot of your identity. So when your habits aren't sticking, you haven't yet upgraded your identity to match where you're going. But when your identity and habits are aligned, that's when things start to get easier. That's when the things you're visualizing and dreaming about, they start to fall into place and they start to stick. It's still not effortless, but it happens so much more naturally with less of that push and pull. Let's talk about how to make this happen. A simple framework, something tangible that you can actually do. First, identify your current identity. The one that's kind of running the show behind the scenes. Our identity usually develops as a way to keep us alive, to make sure we're loved, and to make sure we get our needs met when we're little. What are some of the stories that you tell yourself? The ones that feel like facts and feel like truth, but they may just be what's familiar. I heard Peter Crone say on a podcast that we tend to say our stories are our truth, but that truth is always unchanging. And truth is eternal. Our experiences, they were real and they were our reality, but reality can change. Truth can't. So you can look back on those stories and say, that was my reality growing up, or that was my reality in that situation. But I can change my reality now. I can choose to tell myself a new story and one that is more aligned with where I'm going. So first, recognize and identify your current identity, the one you've always been. Second, define the new identity that you're stepping into, the version of your life that you're dreaming about, the goals that you have. If your life already looked exactly the way you wanted it to look, who would you be? How would you think? And how would you move through your day? And third, start reinforcing your new identity in small reinforceable ways, not big overhauls, just small signals that your brain can recognize and identify as, this is who I am now. That's where the magic and the shifting begins to happen. Now, how do you actually become that person? We're going to make this real because this is where we tend to get stuck. There are 3 ways to begin to shift your identity without making your life a complete dumpster fire. The first is creating an anchor, something small that marks the beginning of your day in alignment with who you're becoming. Not this huge routine with 10 steps to it, just one small intentional action. I talked all about this in last week's episode, so if you missed it, you may want to go back and check it out. The second is evidence. Every action is a piece of evidence for your new identity. You don't need to be and do all the things. You just need to start collecting evidence one piece at a time and then repeating it. And over time, your subconscious starts to soften into, oh, this is who I am now. And the third piece is support. Because let's be honest, some days we're nailing it and some days we feel like, who am I kidding? There are definitely days not any of us fully believe in the version of ourselves that we're stepping into. That's normal. So that's where we begin to borrow evidence, perspective, and belief until we can hold it on our own again. And this is where the people closest to us become invaluable as they encourage us to keep going on the path that we started. And there's one thing that really matters here that we don't always talk about, especially when we're talking about developing, growing into our new identity, visualization, even in the manifestation world. Sometimes it's not talked about enough that if your nervous system doesn't feel safe with the version of you that you're working to become, it will resist it. Behind the scenes, it will hold you back. Your body, your subconscious is designed to always choose familiar over unfamiliar, because in that lens, it's either safe or it's not safe. So the goal isn't just growth. I want to grow into this new version of my life. It's making growth feel safe enough that the changes you're making will stick for the long run. And there's another nervous system piece that we've got to talk about. And that is if the version of you you're moving into feels too fast, too far, or too unfamiliar, your body's going to pull you back to what feels known. So part of this process is going gradually enough that your body can accept the changes as you're making them, come along with you, and row in the boat with you instead of against you as you're making progress. If your body, your subconscious doesn't feel safe, it is going to be rowing against you. But once it feels familiar and aligned, then you'll start to embody the changes that you're making, and they will become permanent. A great example of this, if something like this has ever happened to you, you've decided that you're going to lose weight, you're going on vacation or to a wedding, or it's just time that you want to feel better in your skin. This has happened to me, so I know it firsthand. So you get this goal and you're going to do X. You're going to build muscle. You're going to lose weight. You're going to get into those jeans you had from 5 years ago and all of these goals that you set. And then you actually start making progress. And it's amazing. You're seeing the progress. Your clothes are fitting differently. You're getting more muscular. But if your identity is stuck where your weight or your body composition or your size is where you started, then no matter how in shape you get, no matter how much you reach your goals, if you haven't shifted your identity, it will pull you back. But once you've changed your identity and said, this is not what I'm trying to do, this is who I am, that's when it sticks. James Clear says in Atomic Habits, he gives a great example about identity, how this helps us truly to get to the next step that we're looking for in life. He uses the example of two smokers. And someone says to the one person, Jane, would you like a cigarette? And she says, no, I'm trying to quit. Versus Kim, would you like a cigarette? And she says, no, I don't smoke. That's not who I am anymore. Who do you think is more successful in the long run? Jane will keep muscling it out, powering it out until the circumstances in her life stack up against her so much that she's like, I need a cigarette. But Kim has found new ways of handling those circumstances because it's no longer who she is. It's the same with if we're changing our weight, our career goals, our relationship goals. It's always the same. If we say, I'm trying to blank, fill in the blank of whatever those habits are you're trying to develop, the likelihood is life is going to get too overwhelming and we're going to throw in the towel at some point. So it's not willpower, it's identity. But if the narrative we tell ourselves becomes, that's not who I am anymore. Who I am is, and you create this picture, this is who you are, then you develop different neural pathways, different coping skills. And that way, when life becomes overwhelming, you have a whole new operating system, a whole new framework for how you're dealing with those challenges, which means you don't revert back to the old identity. So if you've been stuck in a rut, and you've been trying and trying new things, but none of them ever seem to catch on, I want you to hear this. It's not because you don't have enough willpower, not because you don't have enough discipline, and not because you need to learn more things. You are not behind. It's only because you've been trying to change your life without updating the identity or the operating system that's underneath, that's driving everything. And the best news is that these are all things you can shift. One small action, one day at a time, one new piece of evidence at a time. Because you're not becoming someone entirely new. You're not changing who you are. You're becoming more of who you already are. And that version of you is so much closer than you think it is. Now, I'm going to give a plug here. A great way to do that is to get your mornings aligned. And that's exactly why I created the Morning Mindset Journal. Your mornings don't have to be perfect, but they're a clean slate that tells your identity, am I aligning with where I'm going or am I not aligning where I'm going? So if you start this clean slate off with a solid foundation, you're already giving yourself evidence that builds self-trust that you're moving in the direction you want to move. You do not need an elaborate morning routine. You do not need to check all the boxes or do all the things right, but you do need a grounded starting point. something that aligns you for the day, gives you direction. This is my North Star. This is the number one thing I'm focused on today. And it reminds your brain, this is who I am now. It's a simple, repeatable way to anchor your identity first thing in the morning, create intentional direction for your day, and start collecting those pieces of evidence consistently that align with the identity you are becoming. Some mornings it's a couple minutes, literally a couple minutes. Some mornings you might have a little more time, a little more capacity to do a deeper dive. But every day that you show up, you're reinforcing the evidence of this is who I am now. And that's where the needle really begins to move in your life. To get the journal, click the link in the show notes. It's free and it is amazing. I can't wait to hear what you think about it. So that wraps up what we have for today. Love that you join me each week. I appreciate you so much. Let me know what you think of today's episode and the Morning Mindset Journal. I'll talk with you next week. Until then, stay pretty well. Bye.